Hello and welcome to Abel Contemporary Gallery. I am very pleased to be joined by Aris Georgiades. He is the current artist being featured in our number 5 gallery space, and he has a wonderful show called Forage. So we're going to have a lovely conversation with Aris about his work, and sort of casual. Aris and I are going to talk for a while about this show, his work in general, his background. And then if anyone watching live has any questions, we're happy to talk at the end. So thanks for joining us.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
Great. So before we talk about the specific work in the show, for people who may not be familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I was born and raised for most of my life outside of Pittsburgh, PA, starting on a little farm. Then we moved away for a while and came back. Obviously the son of maybe not so obviously, I'm the son of a Greek immigrant. My mother was Italian, so I have this Greek-Italian heritage, and I tell my students this. My brother's name is Pete. Why I was named Aristotle is a mystery to me, but I'm sure it was some kind of thing that happened in the hospital or something. Yeah, and it was kind of a upbringing. My father was kind of a blue-collar intellectual, so I was raised, we grew up on a little farm, so I was raised around stuff, materials, equipment, that type of thing.
And were there artists in your family?
Yeah, my mother was trained as an artist, but as was the case with many women from that era, she didn't get to practice as an artist much. She did do a lot of. My father owned a small electrical contracting company, and they did a lot of hand-painted signs. And I recall being a little kid under her table as she was doing these beautiful hand-painted signs. And, now that's kind of a lost trade. But I tried to do that recently for somebody, and it was, it's tricky.
Yeah. So was there an aha moment when you thought, I think I want to dedicate my life to being an artist, or was it a slow, gradual thing?
I guess, thinking way back when I was in high school, the art sort of room was a refuge for a lot of people that, a cross-section of kids that were just didn't fit in or had trouble in school or whatever it was. So I found myself hanging out there a lot. And my sister had gone to college as an artist, and I ended up eventually, I didn't go to school right away. I didn't go to college right away. And I think I went after a year of being out of high school. Then I sort of went and just started taking art classes, and it was comfortable, and it's quite different than the way students are now, but it was a social scene in the studios. So it just kind of kept working out. And I was in and out of undergraduate school at different places.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I think for a lot of artists, you want to be part of the arts because you want to make art, but I also think you like that collective environment.
Right.
Being whatever's going on intellectually with people who are in the arts.
Yeah. And I had always, again, like I said, growing up that way, I was sort of familiar with tinkering. Materials were just in my hands all the time. So,
right. So you have a master's degree, Art Institute of Chicago.
Yes.
And then at that time, did you know that you wanted to be? So Aris, if you don't know, Aris is known for 3 different aspects of his art practice. The sculpture that you do independently. You are a very well-regarded professor of sculpture at the University in Madison. And then you also have a really wonderful studio practice that you do called Actual Size Artworks with your partner, Gail Simpson, where you do public art projects. So did you know when you were at the Art Institute that you wanted to teach?
No, that was, it hardly occurred to me, I guess. Not quite sure why that was, but one thing I tell graduate students, one thing about being in Chicago was there was no transition from being a graduate student to being an artist in the city. So I just I lucked out. I had a great studio as I was getting out of school and lived there for like a decade. And I made a lot more art and I was a lot more professionally active at that time than I was at any other time since. I'm not, it was a different time too. It was a different era, I guess.
Yeah.
And the city was booming, like the gallery was a district and there would be hundreds of people in the street and that type of thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore, but yeah, and I just worked and made a good living working different trades as a carpenter, electrical, that type of thing. Yeah. And I actually was probably making as much money as any of the professors at that time.
That's great. So where was your first teaching job?
It happened about a dozen years after graduate school. My wife was teaching at Illinois State University, which is down in Bloomington, Illinois. So we could still strike Chicago. I think it was like 2 hours away or something. Mm-hmm. That job was sort of grinding away, and I think I taught one semester as a 3D design instructor or something, and not sure why I did that. But we decided to try and give it a shot and apply for some other positions. I started applying for some positions and had this job out on the Northwest Coast at Western Washington University, the most beautiful place I've ever lived. And it was a good experience, and then I eventually took a job back here, partially because it was sort of a Research One institution and it's closer to family.
And a little known fact, your reputation is national, if not international, as a sculptor, but you live really close to Stoughton.
Yes. It's actually a Stoughton address.
Yeah, you have a great property with your wife Gail, and where you have a fabulous studio and a great house, and it's wonderful.
We converted a barn into a house. Yes.
Yeah. It's for sculptors. It's terrific because you have a lot of space and you need it. Okay, so let's start to dig into this work. So the title of the show is Forage. What does that mean?
So, when I was trying to think of a title for the show, the way that this came about, like I had different ideas about what I was going to do in this space, and for some practical reasons, I sort of edited those out and started to think about, well, some of this work is reworked artworks from 10 years ago or something. And I thought about, well, I'm always sort of climbing onto materials, searching for materials. So I began that, foraging for the other materials and foraging for these old pieces, reworking them. I sort of thought of it as the way actually birds and animals often like scrounge around to try and find, food. And I sort of came up with that title that way.
Yeah. So it's a good title. I mean, I think it's really appropriate. And so many of your all of your sculptures, most of the sculptures are made from found objects and are repurposed. Is that correct?
I would say all except the hat. That was
okay.
New material.
And so I'm really interested in, and the things that you're using for the materials seem to have a history to them, and they would have been made by someone who was a good craftsperson as well.
Right.
So I'm really interested. That seems very intentional, and obviously you're an exceptional craftsperson. So it seems to me, and so what's the lineage between? Do you think about the people who made the objects?
Yes.
And how is your labor different from their labor?
Okay. I don't always think about that. Well, it depends on the nature of the material. Like if I'm using an old piece of furniture or if I'm reclaiming architectural trim, I think about the people who handled that. Yeah. Similarly to the way this building is actually. You showed me that beautiful drawing of a pipe that was on the wall from who knows when, When I used to work as a carpenter and sometimes we were doing rehab, I rehabbed several houses in my life and I would take them apart and find notes in the wall from the carpenters. Or actually, the first house that I rehabbed, my wife and I owned, I was remodeling the kitchen and a hammer fell out of the ceiling. And the kid that was helping me told us a story about the empty lot next door this is a long story. I'm sorry, I'm going off, but
No,
the
it's
lot next
interesting.
door had a murder,
Oh.
and it was a hammer murder. Somebody, and I was like, get out. I thought he was pulling our leg, but we did some research. Anyway, so I'm interested in how that, when you do this, when you dig these things up, there's this history to it. A couple of things about that. I do think that times have changed quite a bit, right? The handmade idea certainly in architecture is kind of rare. Things are mostly machine done for practical reasons. Sometimes that's better. I don't necessarily see myself, I'm not so much thinking about the craftsmanship as just the idea of the workers, the people who handled that material.
Yeah.
I guess that's that's what comes to mind. I do look at materials, like even on some of these old chair pieces, some of them were sort of handmade. The carving was probably hand done. Now it's machine done. I also now today, certainly it's been this way for a long time, people who work with their hands are sort of somehow, a different, I'll say lower class than those who are maybe white collar, that sort of distinction. I'm very interested in the history of labor, probably because of my background, but as an artist thinking about that, it's a little bit different. Like, I still work with my hands. Part of it's because, I still work with my hands, I still make things. And I think that idea of making things, connects to the mind intellectually just as much as a researcher would do in the sciences or something.
Right.
I think that the importance of that is undervalued in the consumer world.
No, I know what you're saying. I have often thought that there's, I'm trying to say this the most efficient way, that when you're making art with your hands, that there's something that happens intellectually, and whether it's giving your mind space to roam and to think about the next ideas or whatever that is. And so I do think if you were a master plasterer, for instance, and you were doing beautiful decorative plaster all day long, every day, like where does their mind go?
Right.
What do they envision? What happens mentally when you're doing that?
Yeah, I don't separate the two that much, I guess.
That's actually the answer. That's what I was sort of wondering.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think, with artists, we work with our hands. It connects to our brains. And part of it comes from who we are, from our heart or whatever, it's, so that's what results.
So I know that a lot of your work is about labor, which we're talking about, and issues of class. So is there anything more that you want to say about?
Most of the work in here doesn't necessarily I guess certainly the boot could be seen as relating to labor. I imagine if you look at this work, you see that mark of the hand, that they're made. I have to say that's just the way that I work. Like, I'm still an object maker.
Yeah.
I think plenty of artists are doing other work that's just as exciting or more exciting. That where they're not engaged with that, there might be, for example, they might be using digital tools and that's a tool.
Absolutely.
But it's the same way of getting information out there.
Yeah, they're all tools. Do you, when you're starting with a piece, I don't know, we could talk about any of these pieces, but do you have an idea and then you find the objects to mold into that idea? Or do you get entranced with an object and let it see where it takes you?
I guess both.
Okay.
obviously if I'm doing like a carving, like the boot, let's say, I have an idea because I have to plan it better. But sometimes, I'll start working on something and it's just not working out and something else happens. There's a discovery there. I'm sure it's the same way when you work, right?
Right.
Like what might be a mistake turns out to be a great discovery.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to explain, although scientists understand this. I was going to say it's a hard thing to explain to a lot of the professional world.
Right.
But, I'll have a vision, start working on something sometimes, and it changes completely. I guess I'd say it's pretty rare that they're right on what my idea was.
No, I think that's important. Sometimes you have to get out of the way. Like you have to get out of your own way or out of the way of the thing that you're making and
Sure.
let it become what it's supposed to be or it's going to be.
And with makers, it's interesting that you guys have some beautiful ceramics here, but I work with these variety of materials, and sometimes the material just determines what I can do with it or not, which is part of it.
So, can we talk about a couple of specific pieces
Sure.
in the show and really sort of
Yeah, it makes me a
get
little
into
nervous,
more-
but let's do
okay,
it.
a little bit more minutia. So, we're here with the assistant gallery director, Lauren Miller, and she's videotaping this. So thank you. So, can people watching the video see this piece just to the right of Aris? No, so they can't really see anything. So it doesn't. Well, people can look at the show online to know which pieces we're talking about.
Okay.
No, it's fine. The whole show is available on the website. So if someone's watching this video later, they can go and see which piece we're referencing. So
But it's much better in person.
yes, it is. So do you want me to tell you which piece
Sure,
to talk about?
pick one.
Well, I'm really curious about this piece just to the right of you, just for starters.
So this piece was, it was another piece, maybe
Does it have a specific title? I can't remember.
pillar.
Pillar, yes. Okay.
And I had notions of it, when I was looking at it, I thought, well, I'd like to do something else with this because it was very stable the way it was before. And, it's a combination. First of all, this is all reclaimed material for what that's worth.
And it was a pillar.
Well, no, I made this.
Oh.
I made the column part of it.
Oh, you did? Okay.
It's made out of, it's a long story, but I have miles of old growth Douglas fir, which actually, interestingly enough, came from an old wooden silo here in Stoughton.
Okay.
I took the silo down thinking it was a different kind of material, but it turned out to be something just as nice, I guess. So I fabricated this part, and it was that and the leg. And anyway, the whole idea was thinking about that sort of notion of columns, or traditionally columns, like in Greek architecture, were a stand-in for the figure. And so this is sort of a notion of that, the idea of the leg being firm, something you stand on. And I wanted it to float, so I suspended this just short of the floor. And I was a little freaked out by this because I did not want it to imply lynching or anything, which is kind of in the air.
I didn't think about that at all, but
Oh, good. In the
Now
studio,
it's in our
in the
heads.
studio, it was freaking me out a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it looked really great, but I was like, wait a second. So I wanted the hanging device to be really minimal. And in order to emphasize this idea of a pillar or a column, I built this bottom part as though the leg was, this curvature sort of reflects the cutoff here.
well, that's what I thought you had done. And then I thought you added the legs.
Oh, yeah, well,
There you go.
good. I'm glad it came out that way. Yeah, and I guess this is worth telling. Every artist has their thing. Like, I was working on this in the studio and it fell. And I saw half of it go like flying across the floor, and I was like, there was a little excitement there.
Cursing?
I don't know if anybody was around, but anyway, and so it made me rethink exactly what was going on. One thing about the way I work, which thinking about craft, like I don't know how people would feel about that. A lot of the work out here, I would say, is craft, although it's high level craft.
Yeah.
I like to work so that the way it's made is kind of the way it should be made. Is that clear? Like, I want the craftsmanship to be invisible.
Okay.
You know, I want people to just look at it and think about what it is, not so much, ooh, that's beautiful, you know.
Look at how
Yeah.
No, I think you achieve that.
I mean, on some of the pieces, I think on carvings, people are always going to think that. But the idea of, I guess, you know, that's what I hate to say this, the lay person would say, right? Oh, look how, you know, how did they make this? It must have taken so long. Sort of not interested in that conversation as an artist.
Right. No, I think that makes sense. I think that's obvious.
One reason I feel that way, especially this is emphasized when we do public art. If I need to have something done the right way, I can do a lot of it, but I can find a craftsperson or a tradesperson who does it every day, all day long, and can do it much better than me. So I just want it to be good enough.
Right, yeah. No, I know what you're saying. I mean, I look at some of the things like this piece, which is, you've repurposed a stairwell banister, is that?
Yes.
And then there's this piece of wood coming out of it. And I mean, as an artist, I look at it and think, and I think a little bit about how it's constructed and how you had to do it. But other than that, yeah, I don't think like, wow, no one else could ever have done that better.
Right. Good.
Which I mean in a good way, yeah. Well, tell us about that piece then.
Well, I'm standing here looking at something that isn't sitting quite right, but I do have this thing about detail, which drives me nuts sometimes. Drives my assistants nuts. Yeah, I was thinking about, you know, I salvaged this railing from a building actually up in Madison. It's just I constructed the poles, but the railing was sort of salvaged and repurposed. Took it from a building that the university was tearing down, and amazingly, they let me go in there and pull some stuff out. I say amazingly because there's usually so much bureaucracy involved. And so, you know, when you go into these old buildings, I sometimes compare it to, I live out in the country now, as you know, and sort of fallen in love with trees for a lot of reasons. But when trees start to deteriorate, it's very similar to the way an interior of an old building might deteriorate if it's not cared for. And I sort of was thinking about that and wanted to blend these two together, especially the way woodpeckers work on these trees. It's kind of entertaining. They're going in there. That's part of the notion of forage. They're going in there to find bugs. If you have woodpeckers on a tree, you better watch out because your tree has insects. You know, it might want to do something about that. So I wanted to blend those two ideas. And yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this when I was installing. Some of the holes that the woodpeckers made are as round as they could possibly be. They're perfectly round. Like I could take a round drill bit and stick it in that hole. I did not drill those holes. I did drill the hole or make the holes in the constructed part, obviously.
Yeah. No, I wondered, especially those two at the top.
Yeah.
I thought maybe you did those as an aesthetic choice, but you didn't.
Yeah, no, I didn't. And somebody pointed that out to me again when we were installing, and I guess I never really looked at that one, but it was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Perfect.
No,
which is kind of interesting. I mean, that interests me, right? Again, something's happening in nature that's reflected in, you know, the years of technology to make a drill bit.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Yeah, so then you're the woodpecker down here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fun.
It's kind of funny.
And, you know, I mean, I guess that's an example. Like, I wanted that branch to blend with that post, right? And that's kind of fastidious. Like, I wanted it to look okay, like it could have happened, or, you know, without a lot of obvious filler or nails or something, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I hope that worked out there. Like, it looks kind of sort of grew there, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and then the found object part obviously has a lot of wear, and the tree looks like it has a lot of wear. So, I mean, this piece makes me also think about deterioration. age.
You know, the other thing about that is, I think a lot of this is made to look old,
Oh, okay.
which is an interesting skill that I think a lot of artists have
Yeah.
that they don't. I guess it's something I also tell some of my students sometimes. When I was in Chicago, I often got these sort of, what would you call it, journeyman trade jobs, because they knew I had an MFA for one thing,
Okay.
and they saw I was responsible. But they also, when they found out my skills, yeah, it made me laugh too. Like, no, the first time that happened, I was like, I'm not a journeyman. But they said, that's okay, I won't tell you why. But anyway, part of what they found out, though, is I had skills to fix mistakes. And they were really, like, interested in that. They would just put me on these high-level jobs to just, like, make the mistakes or the roughness disappear. Yeah, which is, sometimes then I spent a lot of time making things look old or blending the old and the new or something like that.
So, and why is it important that it looks old?
Well, I want it to be consistent in
Okay.
this case. I
see.
mean,
Okay.
I guess that's the only one really.
Yeah. And then the last thing, I'm really sort of entranced by, there's some wall pieces across from us that are these little vignettes,
Right.
with stairs and things. And are those newer pieces?
Relatively, yes.
Relatively new.
Um,
I don't know what, and I haven't quite spent enough time with them to even think what I think they're about, but I'm really interested in them. And when I come in here, I'm just sort of enthralled, and I want to just sort of sit and spend time looking at them, and I find them really appealing. So it's not really a question, but
no, I mean, you want to hear what they're about, and I can't. I'm sort of like never
or
thought that through because there is
how you came to them.
Well, there is a certain part of. I'm sure this happens with you. Sometimes you just have to go in the studio and start something,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably how these came about. Like, I have a lot of this material lying around. Well, it's hard to tell what that is, but a lot of this certain material lying around, and I was interested in the parts. For example, dismantling old school chairs. The way they're made is different than the way they're made now, but also there's some interesting looks to that, something about the history of it. In fact, I have a piece that we didn't put in here that's old school desks with all the graffiti on it from, and I just thought I didn't put it in here for various reasons. But anyway, so some of these started out as kind of exercises, thinking about formal qualities. Certainly they're architectural, I think. And some of them seemed very satisfying to me when I made them. These sort of brief, relatively speaking, brief exercises in, exercising my mind in terms of formal qualities. I still really believe that at least most visual artists that make stuff are the best work is the work I think that still uses formal tools, whatever you're trying to say. It's not random. So sometimes I exercise that stuff, like this piece here, for example. Yeah, it's an old door, but it's also abstraction, right?
Right.
And, I posted one or two of these pieces, I remember, on Instagram and got all this response. I was kind of shocked. And it was from abstract painters,
Okay.
which was kind of nice.
Yeah.
Geometric abstraction is still one of my favorite things to look at, which is weird when you look at this work maybe, but.
Well, and then that's interesting because these two pieces with the chair legs, well, and then I think about this giant leg to the right of you, which is a human leg. But these legs, I mean, I know I can see the beauty in the top part where the pattern that's made from the tops of them, and you've made it really flat. But they also have this movement, like they could be crazy weird. Like they look like they're going to sort of skitter across the floor or something. I don't know if you.
Certainly that one does,
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
Like this sort of insane amount of legs. I also think a lot of the work seems like there's a bit of humor to it. I don't know if that's If that's an okay, I hope
Yeah,
that's an okay place.
yeah. I mean,
You never know if telling someone that they're.
I don't see it until after the fact, but sometimes, yeah. Certainly, I guess this one, I wouldn't use humor, but character. I wanted there to be a
like,
certain kind of character
not like
to it.
haha, like
Right.
belly laugh, but there's a wit about it or something because.
Yeah, I wish I could do more work that was.
Because it's kind of an insane amount of legs, all put together. If you think about, and the function becomes this absurd, thing.
Yeah, and I mean, probably most people here are an artist. Selecting that stuff becomes this kind of chore, right? Oh no, that one doesn't look right.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh no, that one's too short. Like the decisions are in your head that you can't really quantify. It's like, yeah, that's what I want.
Yeah.
There isn't like something specific until you put them next to each other.
Right. So, unless there's any other pieces you want to talk about, not to put everybody here watching on the spot, but if people want to jump in and ask any questions.
So, I love your stuff. And I see thanks. Metal work too, all the time. It was metal. But with these discovered found objects, foraged objects, did you ever run into something you go, I don't know what it's going to be, but that is amazing? Oh yeah, you should see behind my studio. I've got to dump stuff now, like I have too much. I mean, it's mostly raw material, but there are, like for that piece, which I can't remember the title of, trim something.
That's an old door.
It's an old door, but it's also trim from maybe windows or furniture. I have a collection of that kind of stuff, and I'll dig it out. In fact, I was just putting some away this morning, clearing away a path in the studio so we could get something out. And, I'll blend those materials. So I have a backlog of it, way more than my wife cares for. One thing about this piece here is one that I wish I could do more of, in the sense that I was working with a bunch of stuff, dismantling things, dismantling some old chairs, right? And then I saw these two chair seats that were similar but different, and put them together like this, almost on a whim, the little bow tie joint. And it was like, it happened in a day.
Right.
And I was like incredibly satisfied with that. And I wish that would happen more often, because sometimes these pieces, you struggle to make the decisions, and I don't know why I'm talking that way, but it's, it can be really like, it can take months to get through a piece. And then sometimes they happen really quick, and they're just as successful or maybe more successful. It's worth saying, I never got into this. I shouldn't say this in front of you. I never started making art thinking that I was going to make a living as an individual artist, which is not the reason I'm teaching. I just sort of fell into the teaching thing. But anyway.
Are you saying that it was just you had a realistic sense of the
I
economy?
guess that's what it was. I spent most of my undergrad career pursuing metalsmithing. Very detailed, and it never. I don't know if it's because we never talked about that in school or what, but I always saw the idea of making money as a different kind of thing. Or maybe I just wasn't concerned with making money, because when I needed to make money, I could go to work.
Right.
Which is unfortunate that you'd think I would walk away from what you're being trained for to make a living. But it's a curious thing. I think about that sometimes when I'm working with students, but
I think a lot of artists realize that. They don't think, oh, I'm going to support myself forever. I mean, there's probably some who think that that's going to happen, but I think there's a reality that you're probably going to need to do something else. Like marvelous artists who don't make a living, even if they sell almost everything they make, they can't get by on that.
That's horrible, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a that could be we could have a whole other conversation about.
Well, that's one reason I said I think a lot of artists these days that you sort of read about or something came up privileged. You know, they had a leg up somehow. Maybe that's sour grapes, but it's hard to imagine like coming from modest means and being able to have the time to develop a career or live in New York or LA or something, which are incredibly expensive places to live, and make it happen.
Right, because even if you get into a phenomenal gallery in one of these larger markets and sell a lot more work, the cost of living there is astronomical. So it all still becomes incredibly difficult to do. Often the best instructors, not always, but oftentimes some of the best people that you can learn from are in universities. The cost of tuition is a lot. So you get done with graduate school and you have an enormous amount of student loan debt. And all that stuff
fortunately
makes it really hard.
Fortunately, a lot of graduate programs now are becoming free, which is a new thing.
Which is great, yeah.
I went to the School of the Art Institute a long time ago, and when you went there, it was free.
Wow.
Now it's just the opposite, right? And changed just a couple of years after I got out. They started slowly like changing the sort of calculation there. But
who funded it?
I was on the Brown Fellowship. I don't know who that was.
Okay.
There was sort of one person in the sculpture area that was paying.
That's so great.
Yeah, and it flipped. Now it's the other way around. But one other thing about teaching, which I should mention, thinking about making and craftsmanship and whatnot. When I first came here, I almost came here years ago for graduate school for metals, which your husband did. Mm-hmm. There was a gentleman here, Fred Fenster, who was fantastic. He was the reason I was thinking of coming to school here. Fantastic metalsmith, yes. And I got hired here, much later to teach sculpture. And I ran into him, I think it's last year or something. And we talked about how students had changed. And he had very few students from the farm that knew anything about how to work with their hands. Now, I have students who don't know how to use a hammer. They don't know what a pair of pliers is or a screwdriver. Now, to me, that's like shocking, right? But now it's just, there's a whole different existence. And so I feel like I resolved this in my head a few years ago, if I can show them anything about the built environment, they're going to take that with them the rest of their life. Because, just walking down the street, like some notion of how that door was made, or, just any notion of how the built environment works might change people's perspective over the long haul. And it's really, I didn't think that was so important for a while, but now I'm thinking, this is vital.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and like you said before, all tools are important, whether they're digital tools or you use a camera or you use a table saw. But it does, if you have an idea and the skill that you need to see that idea come to fruition is using a lathe or a table saw, and you don't have those skills, and often if you've never used anything like that, you don't have the confidence, it can be really intimidating. When I went to high school, we didn't really have much of an art program, but boys took shop and girls took home ec.
Right.
And so when I went to art school and I took my first sculpture class, I was completely petrified of the lathe and the table saw, and and I just had to and not that I'm that comfortable now, even though my husband is a woodworker. And I always say, someday you're going to teach me how to use these things.
Right.
Who knows? But I'm not scared anymore. But it was really intimidating.
I recently read a quote from, of all people, Jessica Stockholder. And she was talking about how in a previous era, when you needed something, it was usually something that you got from a local vendor who might have made it, or we understood that this was made in Milwaukee, that type of thing. And there was sort of an understanding that someone made this thing on the machine or whatever. Now, I thought this was an interesting take. Now, people are all about just getting it fast and cheap. and it's often coming from a third world country. Nobody's thinking about how it's made. Nobody seems to care. So I think if you have some understanding of how things are made, just some understanding, you don't have to know how to do it. It changes people's vision. And I often go back to the quote I heard when I was a kid that Andy Rooney, remember, used to do 60 Minutes. He would do a commentary, and he said, "You're going to be paying your plumber what you pay your lawyer," and we are almost there. Because we're not training anybody to do that. Like, nobody wants to do that. So we'll see what happens. I don't know.
That's true. So, if you go to art school and then you're worried how you're going to make a living as an artist, you can become a part-time plumber to pay for your art habit, maybe.
Well, I tell grad students, if you know how to use a cordless drill right now, there's a guy in Madison apparently that on a bicycle, he has a cart of tools, and he rides around town and he's making a good living just being Mr. Fix-It. If you need something fixed in your house right now, good luck. If you can get somebody to respond. Well, you guys have been working on this building. If you need a repair done, it might take a month.
No, it takes a really long time. It's true. No, but that's also, people come in the gallery and they, a lot of times, if people are not artists, but they've even taken a beginning pottery class, or they did some painting on the side, you can realize how hard it is, and they think, wow, now I really appreciate what I'm seeing. It's a great.
Sorry if I kind of went off there, I guess.
No. Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in? Yeah.
So I'm interested in this piece. You kind of briefly talked about the woodpecker holes versus the one you made yourself. There's kind of like this breakdown between nature and man-made in the objects. But I kind of look at the world differently in that I see humans as being from nature. So anything humans do is inherently natural in my eyes. And so I just wondered if you wanted to maybe comment on that in relation to this piece.
Well, I'll comment on your comment. That seems optimistic to me. I have a much darker view of what humans are doing with nature now. Anyway, in terms of this piece, what was your question about it? I guess thinking about the man-made, I guess I'd see the man-made, certainly this era of man-made as being temporary, the way we were doing it. Like, it's going away fast. If you want to have a building with natural woodwork in it, you're going to pay top dollar if you can find someone to do it, as opposed to 40 years ago when that was the way it was done. 60 years ago, that type of thing. This building, the timber framing, the way this building is made, that's not how they build them anymore. Actually, the barn we live in, I'm sort of interested that those remnants from the boot, that's an old timber frame barn that I had taken down. It's a long story, but the timber frame building was built by hand, no power tools. That's kind of fascinating to me. That doesn't, well, there are timber framers now that do it for the craftiness of it or something. But I guess I see the interaction is not necessarily positive. I'm curious what you think we're doing that's, you sounded optimistic about that.
Well, I mean, maybe not optimistic, more just realistic. I don't know. People like to separate human action from nature.
Okay.
And I think of it as more as being the natural force of things.
Okay.
If we come from nature, inherently anything we do is natural, whether or not it's destroying the planet or not. I mean, there is the bird builds the nest, we build the banister. It's
Okay.
kind of the same thing.
And maybe we've just, it's like having too many ants in your house, or maybe there's too many of us, and so.
Yeah. Well, I think that's natural.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Like, it's like.
It's a big conversation.
Yeah, that is a big conversation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. It's like if there's, well, I guess if you were to think about humans, what would you call them if they were natural? Supernatural?
Yeah.
I think I understand where you're coming from. Just we're not concerned about nature. You know, it's still in a capitalist system. It's still about whatever it needs to make money, and it's very short-sighted now. Is how I see it. Like, I don't have any kids, but I talk to my friends that have kids, and I said, "Man, you must be radical." You know, like I would be if I had children. Man, I'd be a radical environmentalist. I mean, I still vote that way, you know, but yeah, I think about that. I mean, again, like this old growth Douglas fir, that silo took down. These are 21-foot lengths of perfectly clear Douglas fir. You know, that came from an old growth tree. Old growth trees eat up more CO2 than any other trees now. And we plowed them all down. I'm sorry, I'm going to go off here a little bit. But so when I think about, sometimes when I salvage these materials, I think about that. I think about, man, this can't go in the landfill, you know. And there's a couple of companies even around Madison that do preserve these materials and try and resell them and whatnot. Urban Wood in Oregon, Wisconsin takes down urban trees and remills them and sells them. And that's just like, yeah, that's not doing anything. Like, I'm not doing anything to save the planet. It's just a kind of a lifestyle choice then, right? And I still drive a car. I have a diesel truck, you know, which is really old, but you know, it's burning diesel. Anyway, so I'm hypocritical in a sense that way, but at least I'm trying to be cognizant of it. I hope.
We hope so.
Thank you.
Oh,
you got a question? Sure, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think it relates to something you said earlier. And what strikes me about seeing things that are made by hand or repurposed by hand is it helps me, or it stimulates my seeing the craftsmanship in old buildings or old furniture or whatever. And just like I didn't appreciate mountains and metamorphic rocks until I took geography and realized
They're millions of years old, and
yeah.
that, yeah.
Well, but you can see the difference between this and a particle board, and you start to walk to a place like Chicago or Hyde Park or something, and you start to see things differently, having seen things like this put together.
Good. That makes me feel good. Thanks.
Yeah. No, that's a great comment actually, because I think like landscape painting can do that. I think if you see a beautiful landscape, what happens is you go back out in the natural world and it makes you pay attention to it in a fresh way. So that's great. I have no idea what that is, but
Pretty sure it wasn't a
maybe
gunshot.
well, we are hoping to get somebody here to do some roof work, speaking of craftsmanship. So perhaps they're on the roof now doing that. But anything else before we, this might be our signal. Thanks everyone for showing up today. And thank you, Aris.
Sure.
This was a really, really interesting conversation. And I appreciate it.
You say that to all the artists, I'm sure. So.
Well, they're all interesting. No, this was a great conversation. If the video works out, we will have it posted on the website so it can be watched by other people. So this is thanks for being our guinea pig with our new mics and everything. So.
Well, thanks for letting me have the show here. I mean, or inviting me to have the show.
It's fantastic. And then, Lauren, can you remind me, how long is the show up through? May 29th. So tell your friends. All right. Thanks again.